It's a huge question. Yeah, I don't think life is asking in a nice way right now. Like we're done past nice. Nature will be fine. Nature will survive. It really is this humbling idea of how necessary I am in the landscape and how necessary everything that is part of the landscape is to me. Interdependency, I think, for humanness, it's humility of just realizing there's more to this world and the way that the world supports us that we really should be reverent of. I think a lot of people right now need to be doing power framing for themselves. They need to be figuring out what their values are and where their lines are in the sand of what they're willing to compromise and what they're willing to not compromise. Pause, be still, listen, dive into that humility. You truly are connected. And with that, don't think you have to do everything at once. And that's where people really fall into traps. But if you do have institutional power that generally comes with a lot of money, think, do I have enough?
Welcome to the Future Kind podcast, where conscious nourishment is our guide. From the cellular to the cosmic, we're exploring how our relationship with food has the power to transform the world. Now settle down, my dear, while you take a while to rest. Kia Ruiz, welcome to Future Kind.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
So I want to start by acknowledging and honoring your leadership over the past couple of years as the Non-GMO Project Board of Directors Chair. We've been in a time of a lot of regeneration and evolution. And in particular, your expertise around interdependency has been such an amazing resource for me and us during this time. And that's something that I would love to dive into with you today, because I think during these times, that concept of interdependence is something that a lot of people could use more depth of understanding and more grounding in. And I'm wondering if to start, you could share a little bit about what interdependence is, what it means to you, like what your understanding of it is, and then we can branch into how that shows up in our work on food.
What it is, you can talk about it on so many levels. On a scientific level, when we're talking about ecology and niches and Hutchinsonian's idea of like what a niche is with that hyperdimensional volume, it's all these variables that we can't really even tease apart with our mind half the time of what makes a system. And it's the idea that when we remove one thing from the universe, we find it hitched to everything else, if we're going to take that John Muir quote. And in the scientific sense, it's something that really is unquantifiable because of how all these variables interact with each other. I guess in a spiritual sort of way, it is not only am I connected to something and just trying to keep it on one level, but I'm connected to things on various levels of hierarchy. And even though I'm a human being, that doesn't mean that I'm superior to where nature and everything in my environment is on a hierarchy. It really is this humbling idea of how necessary I am in the landscape and how necessary everything that is part of the landscape is to me. And then in a social sense, it really is humans needing each other. And I don't know if you've ever seen His Holiness the Dalai Lama talk, but I remember seeing him speak a number of years ago and just talking about how are we connected. And it's just like, are you wearing clothes? I know you didn't make your clothes. And the way that, factory clothing comes out and everything, even something that we don't value as much because of how we get it on sale, it's still touched by so many hands. So interdependency, I think for humanness, it's humility of just realizing there's more to this world and the way that the world supports us that we really should be reverent of. And I think slowing down a little bit to realize those connections is how we can realize our whole humanness. And so it kind of is a gift when people can allow themselves to be that humble.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm thinking about So we first came into connection because of your leadership work on the Colorado GMO labeling initiative back in 2014. So yeah, we've both been working on non-GMO efforts in our own ways for a long time. How do you think about how the GMO issue relates to interdependence?
I think the GMO issue relates to interdependence in the United States in a very significant way, and that as that movement got galvanized politically with GMO labeling, just that your readers understand this was all about GMO labeling for consumer awareness, it really became this point to pause of how our food system had accelerated from the 70s and 80s due to corporate lobbying coming in and essentially corrupting our food system. And I think a large swath of the country just had their faith in God and government and being told what to do, that they didn't even realize food became less nutritious. The things that were sold to us really were things that we shouldn't be eating. And so, yes, while we're dealing with so many pesticides being pumped in and even understanding the pathways that that was happening, I'm like, 2014, we're barely talking about BT. We're barely talking about like the psyllium getting inserted into a seed and why you need a topical application of a pesticide there. And just what some people might call advancements of how we're dealing with pesticides and having to really overload our crops now, it still comes back to sort of simplicity of knowing more about our food system. So I know in 2014, when I was involved with that political campaign, we knew we were going to get crushed by the amount of money put in with the opposition, but we knew that it was a good fight for people to pause and really talk about their food system. And we haven't had that many pauses as a population to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you share a little bit about what your experience was in that campaign and like some of the things that you worked on as part of that?
Sure. I'll back up a little bit. So when California first went, I was tapped by some people from the social media, new media side, because I do have a background in science. I got to a PhD candidacy. I did not finish my PhD in biology, but I had just had kids. So I was just taking that sacred time at home with my kids. And I saw some women trying to galvanize talking about food. And I'm just kind of like, whoa. I mean, like, I appreciate the passion, but I thought their talking points are off. And what they were trying to talk about science was really bad. And when I was in my program, I did teach human bio, marine bio, and I was really, really good at conveying scientific principles to the non-scientific public. And so just kind of seeing what I thought were missteps with science miscommunication, I kind of stepped in a little bit. And California campaign, some of the people with that campaign started working with me about how do we get some more factual information out there that will actually connect with voters. Washington went, I got tapped a little bit with that with Washington as well. And so when Colorado went, and for a lot of people that don't understand the strategy of this, Colorado went out of order from what were considered like sort of the way the movement was advancing. Colorado jumped in with a couple of rogue people that weren't part of California or Washington. And so when Colorado went, it's like, hey, Kia's in Colorado. You better talk to her quick. And so that's how I got involved. And I came in originally, it was like, what do we call it? And I'm like, new media, your new media specialist. And what I was doing is I was trying to take interpretation points. And so like when we educate on topics, you have like your regular pedagogy of how you do something in a school system. And then you got to think about when you go to the zoo or other places and we deal with interpretation, it's 15 minutes to a minute or a static image. And that's all you get for educating on something. So I was trying to take those principles for how we were working online. And then we were so scrappy that we were paying this firm to help us with our talking points. And where our focus was, but we were doing it bargain basement. So as like we managed to get the ballot signatures in, and then it's like, okay, we're going to be on the ballot. What are our talking points? Meanwhile, we're dealing with bargain basement consulting, and they're not giving us our talking points. Like, well, you're paying us so little. We're kind of helping you out. And then like we didn't get our talking points until the week before the ballots were mailed out, because Colorado is really cool. If people don't understand, we have mail-in voting. So we remove a lot of voting barriers. So you can't have a grassroots campaign with talking points the week before people are supposed to start voting. So I'd say probably in about August of that year, as we knew we were going to have the signatures, I was in coffee table discussions about we need to have talking points. These are the talking points that I see. And then I developed the talking points that basically the week before the ballots went out, our consulting firm went, hey, these should be your talking points. They were the talking points. So then I became a strategist with the campaign. And then between August to September and October, we had, like, we're in Colorado, we have Boulder, we have the Boulder food system and some really great companies here and activists, and they were being spokespeople for this. Except I was using the Blue Book. And so in Colorado, we have a legislative process where we have this nonpartisan Blue Book that comes out to basically educate voters on what are the economics if this actually happens, where did this come from? And it's supposed to get rid of all the partisan mess and everything. So I studied the Blue Book. I knew exactly what our legislators said would happen if this bill became reality. So it was really easy for me to go to a couple of debates and just go to the Blue Book, go to basic science, stick with our talking points. So then I became a spokesperson, which was like, so I went from new media strategist to strategist to spokesperson. And then eventually, as the campaign declined and then we're going into the Dark Act and all that stuff there, I became the interim director. So that was my path with that campaign.
Well, thank you for all of that work. And like you said, just the way that, I mean, all of those labeling initiatives, even though they were eventually overridden, even the ones that did pass, they were so critical in raising awareness. And, you know, that work on talking points is such a key part of that, of being able to engage people. And I really appreciate your orientation and skill with scientific communication. I'm thinking about, just backing up to what you said about that you had come up with the talking points that the consultants eventually came up with. And it kind of reminded me of an experience I've had a handful of times now where things that I have been learning through my involvement in like different ways of studying regenerative business and Renourish Studio and learning about living systems principles. Like I'm studying all of this stuff really hard to like decolonize my mind and be able to understand interdependence. And I have to like read books and go to things, and then I'll have a call with you and you just like already get it all.
Yeah.
And I would love if you can share with people, like, how is it that you already get it all? Like, what about your background, your ways of understanding? I know there's a lot to that, but I think, you know, part of it is wanting to uplift that for people who have resource and connection to non-dominant culture, that a lot of stuff that is really necessary for healing and repair and this concept of future kind in these times, like, is already right there. There's nothing that has to be learned. And like those of us who are more part of dominant culture, and like myself, who have been like really conditioned, like not in a way that aligns with my values, but just like my thinking has been conditioned in very colonized ways. And there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen. And so I'm really grateful that I get to learn from you as a touch point in that, and just would love to have some of your wisdom about that shared with others too.
Yeah. So for a lot of people that may not understand, Megan is the executive director of the Non-GMO Project. And coming in on the board, I eventually became the chair of the board of directors with the Non-GMO Project. So Megan and I, we've been having one-on-one meetings that are scheduled, like you would do with this relationship. But I think we've cultivated a really good relationship with this. We have really honored each other in humble ways. And for people that don't see this, I don't look like Megan. And I have heard your language even change so much in the last couple of years, because you used to say another phrase and I'd be like, dominant culture, keep it off dominant culture, for a particular reason, because you used to say white supremacy this, white supremacy that. And I'm like, no, it's not white supremacy. It goes beyond that with how people are in compliance to it, adhere to it, uphold values. So my background, my father's Ngābi Bule. So that is indigenous Panamanian, northern portion of Panama. A lot of interaction with the Bree, southern Costa Rican tribe. My mother is Black and 5 tribes descent. And there's really great history on basically enslaved Africans, eventually African Americans in the 5 tribes of the East, in the Southeast. And so with my parents coming together and their experience in the United States, I am somebody that the foundational United States has never been kind to in an institutional way. So I'm going to back way up here on kind of explaining how I world walk is what I'm eventually going to get to. So I talk a lot about the 4 eyes of oppression when we're talking about systems thinking and systems work, just how we kind of come together as people. Megan and I work on an interpersonal level. Personally, what I have is my internal ideology. There's institutional and there's ideological. So it goes, ideological is the highest one, which everybody kind of holds as truths. And this is where a lot of our stereotypes come from, where we think pretty horrible stereotypes of each other, or really glamorizing stereotypes that aren't always true. The institutional one is basically those that have a seat at the table. And in the US, it really is economic institutional power. They're able to hold it. And you don't really see people like me becoming the chair of the board of directors from the non-GMO project. Interpersonal is me and Megan. And it'll be really easy for Megan to be like, oh, you're dismissed. I don't want to talk to you, in which case I may never have even made it onto the board for the non-GMO project. And then internal is, am I going to be compliant and try to be like Megan and essentially uphold systems of dominant culture, even though I don't look like somebody in dominant culture? So those are the ways that I kind of walk in the world when I look at power dynamics and really values that organizations or entities are trying to hold. And then that's what we usually challenge or make sure that we're upholding. So there's that idea, very dominant culture thinking, but that's how I look at it. My background is also, like I said, science. In biology, I've worked for a number of organizations. I used to be in a herpetology lab. I actually used to be a backpacking researcher, which is the best ever. So I've spent a lot of time outside, and my undergrad degree is from Humboldt, where the redwoods are. So it's just a different kind of life there. And then there's the indigenous side of me. I've never been Christian. I've never been Catholic. And I'm just so grateful to my family that I've never had, I guess, the impressions of the church or that kind of ideology on me, because that is a very dualistic framework of black and white, heaven and hell, one way or the other, and losing nuances in the world. So I bring in those 3 pieces of just who I am and never having to be forced to be Christian or Catholic. I bring in my education and studying of ecology and dimensions and just being out in the natural world and natural landscape, looking at phenomena. And I still have a lot of awe. And then I look at my understanding of frameworks of power in the United States. And that brings me who world walks. So I world walk this idea of, what is interdependency? How am I connected to people? How am I connected to my values? As well as I am very fortunate to have a seat at a number of tables to bring in that influence. And that is important in 2025. And even when we met 2022, I think it was 2022, we started talking around 2021. And, we're getting to a tipping point with climate crisis. We've gone just where we are and where the projections were. I know when I was in grad school, my advisor's husband was in a climate lab and they really wanted me to do a climate project with frogs. And the prospects of that just look so depressing. I'm like, no way. And I already had a lot of experience doing fire response, like the massive fires in Montana in 2000. I was up there with the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute shortly afterwards, looking at this one species of frog that has a really small thermal window and how they were coming back after these massive fire events. And that was so depressing because I knew that we were just going to go into a lot more of wildfire seasons, extended seasons. And it's like, okay, what am I going to do there? And it was pretty easy to say no to doing that kind of work because you see the trends, you see what's going to happen, and we're not going to buy our way out of climate chaos and humans' influence on the effects there. And we're also not going to do math our way out of it. And that's something I'm seeing right now with people working on climate action plans. It's like, we can trade off this and trade off that instead of actually looking at community-based solutions for how we're approaching climate mitigation in geographic areas. So the world walking and me, it just kind of comes together with a very pragmatic view of our relationships with each other and these ideas of institutions.
How would you suggest for people who are just hearing those 4 eyes for the first time, and this is maybe a big question, we don't have to go all the way there, but just thinking about ideologies, institutions, interpersonal, internal, do you have any invitations or suggestions about how people hearing that for the first time might think about those things or like step into responsibility in relationship to those?
Sort of. I think right now, and I know we'll eventually get there and not get too heavy on it, I hope, because this is future kind and kind is in the word. I think a lot of people right now need to be doing power training for themselves. They need to be figuring out what their values are and where their lines are in the sand of what they're willing to compromise and what they're willing to not compromise. And that includes your proximity to success with however you define success in those four different levels of ideology, institutional, interpersonal, and then internal. And I really think, like, with companies and nonprofits and everything, we figure out our mission statement, we figure out our value. It's a process that many of us have been through. We've had the luxury of having a seat at a pretty nice table to make decisions for an entity. But it's time to really turn that focus inward. And we're not just going to get a blanket from sitting in a church. If church and Christianity is where your ideology North Star is, you still need to go ahead and do that kind of power framing to see how those four levels of power or oppression, depending on which side you're looking at, relate to you.
Yeah, thank you. In talking about the climate work that you didn't want to do, and then I'm reflecting on the kinds of work that you are doing now, and it's a lot of, not only with the Non-GMO Project and Food Integrity Collective, but I know in a lot of ways you're increasingly engaged with food. I feel inspired by the role that food can play in where there is, like you said, we can't like math our way out of it. It's a change in mindset. But like, what potential do you see for food to be a reconciling force with like actually finding a viable path forward for life on Earth?
Food has gotten so big, and the Non-GMO Project benefits from that, who some of our clients are. We have to recognize that. But food has also gotten so big that it's really gotten away from a lot of people. There's some people that are going to have the privilege to buy every non-GMO gummy bear and Pop-Tart for their kid. There are going to be people that are just trying to survive. And I know everybody's talking about eggs right now and the price of some things. And there's always been a level of people that have had a connection to what they're growing. And it is in that in all of our communities. It's urban garden programs. It's your neighbor having a gardenscape. It's people actually investing into community supported agriculture. It's having potlucks with people. There are things that come down to a very small geographic scale that are not only empowering with how we're feeding ourselves and the quality of our nutrition, but the mental health aspects of just eating together are going to make somebody more resilient. I'm going to say that, like in my kids' school district, last year, they were sending out all the stuff about you have to attend school, and all these digital like ads essentially saying, show up to school, not just for count day to be counted in for their budget. And they were getting their information from our local children's hospital that was looking at, we have a mental health crisis for our young people. What can we do to arrest that and make things better for them? And looking at all their research, the number one thing they could have done is have families eat together. But for a school district to tell families eat together, that is overreach. So they had to scale back to what was further on that list that families can do together or that parents can tell their kids to do, and that was attendance. But eating those meals regularly together have a much better outcome for kids. That's a social determinant of health. So when we're talking about food and the optimism in the food system, with climate, with social, with everything else, there are very small things that we can do. And it can be intimidating if you don't already grow any food. Like, how do you essentially get your hands into the game? Even something as simple as if you have access to dirt and getting your hands in the dirt to grow something, your skin is not a totally impermeable membrane. Like, stuff gets through there. So the act of you getting bare hands into the dirt actually affects your gut microbiome, which is something a lot of people are being affected with right now with poor quality food and illnesses and stress. So like, how do we reverse all this? We try to find some stillness if we can. And I know people are listening to this right now. If you're listening to this and you are multitasking, hopefully it's something beautiful like taking a walk or gardening as we're getting into that part of the season. That kind of stuff, it seems like it's woo-woo ideology or whatever, but those connections are going to stick with you when you're a voter and it's time to do things to support climate health and the way that we really are showing sacredness and love for the environment that we're part of.
In your work with food, one of the many things I love about you is like, I never know when we get on a call, like what interesting thing you're going to be up to. You are so dynamic and you, like you said, world walk in so many ways and spaces. And so I know you do everything from presenting on panels at conferences and showing up to board meetings, and you lead trainings. But on food, I feel like maybe kind of the other end of the spectrum from the boardrooms and podiums is work I know you've done leading groups to study food and herbs in Central America. And I would love just anything that you want to share about that, because I think, for many people who have had no exposure to non-dominant culture and how food and medicine and interdependence show up in indigenous ways of living, hearing like vivid descriptions of like what it's actually like can be really evocative and helpful, because I think part of the idea of becoming the humans the future needs is that we need a vision to be tracking to. So it can't just be like what's not working, but having inspiration and a sense of like, what could it be? So I've felt really inspired myself by some of what you've shared from those trips. And yeah, I'm wondering what you can share with our listeners about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to kind of talk about is integration here, because we do have movements like Land Back. And I hope everybody here that is dominant culture and very resource, this idea of land back is a rematriation of resources to groups that have been violently removed from those resources. And I'm just going to preface this with most of the biodiversity in this world is still in care of indigenous people. So if you do have some extra resource, consider like really rematriating a lease, signing a lease over on some of this land, because we know bison herds coming back in the plains out of the Denver area. It is so helpful because it helps create these matrices of vegetation that used to once exist here. That's really good for carbon sink and what we're thinking about how carbon and water move about in the landscapes. So throwing that out there, integration. But with that said, we're not going to go back to pre-colonial times. So what we need are new visions of how we're doing this work together and how we're upholding non-dominant culture, non-dominant thinkers into the space, because there really aren't a lot of solutions there. I know with the wildfires in California and the wildfires in Australia, firefighting agencies have gone to indigenous cultures like, what did we do? Like, this has really gotten out of control. We could use your support now. So with the work in Central America, like in the area that my dad's from, a phenomena that's really interesting there is this area is now known for coffee. And so if you think about geisha coffee in Panama, it's like some of the more expensive coffees you're going to find. And it's grown in the shade of Volcan Baru. And it is not something that's endemic there. Really wild thing happened in the 1800s where you had indigenous people in Africa, you had indigenous people in Central America. And the idea was people were culturally very tied to these plants. I can tell you in my father's tribe, you have different clans. There is one clan that is totally all about cacao. It's all about the plant where you get chocolate from. Like you have a cacao priest, a cacao priestess, and they do very significant and intimate work that follows you from before you're born until after your afterlife. And the plant is just integrated in every way into a life way there. And imagine you just had a bunch of people in Central America that all had a cacao priest and priestess, and that was part of a way of life, and that's just one clan. And then imagine if those people are removed or they're enslaved, and then cacao's ripped away from them, something that's so sacred. And it's like, let's cut it on a ship, take it to Africa. And while we're doing the same thing to Africans to empower them from their life way, let's take this coffee bean and then take it over to Central America. And so then you have huge tracts in Africa and Central America that no longer have their plant that they evolved with for a lifetime, for a culture. And all of a sudden it's like, here, you go ahead and you deal with this. And so in Africa right now, we have cacao growers that have never tasted chocolate. They've never tasted processed chocolate with the sweetness in a chocolate bar. And like, they're still like extremely poor working and living conditions, especially with some of our larger chocolate makers with Africans. And they never grew with chocolate. And, just same thing with Central America. You have people there, they never dealt with really coffee beans. So, saying that because I have been going back to Central America, and it was so interesting for me and my connection there. My father was taken from his people when he was a toddler. So he didn't grow up with that either. He was taken from his people. His mother was dying of tuberculosis. He was dying of malaria and polio. And basically, she couldn't hug him or care for him. So when he was a toddler, he couldn't stand upright and walk around. And so he was plucked out of the jungle knowing she was going to die. He went to live with the family in Panama City, and he was supposed to die, but he didn't die. So my dad ended up coming to the U.S. He didn't know any of this really about himself, but I was doing ecology work and doing ecology work in Central America. And I ended up getting married down there. And at our wedding, I had us do this thing where it wasn't just all surfing and fishing. I made everybody be bleeding hearts. So everybody was asked to come in and bring in stuff for indigenous children to go to school. And I said, fill your suitcases with this. That way you have room for souvenirs when you come back home. I had people that were in hospitals, get instruments for surgery that we throw away in the U.S., sterilize them and take them down there for their medical facilities. And I had us do a gardening project for an indigenous woman that was brought down from the mountain because her body was failing her. And we went to go do this project, presented her the plants that we were going to plant this barren landscape with. And she's just getting really angry at us. And the people that were hosting us were saying, she has dementia. She just doesn't want you here. My father out of nowhere goes, no, she says you're evil and she wants you away from her land. And I'm like, what? And nobody there could talk to her. And all of a sudden my dad just shows up oh no, I speak this woman's language. And I'm like, dude, what do you have to say for yourself?
Wow.
And then, we got further confirmation.
Are you saying literally, verbally, he understood her or?
Yep. Oh yeah. And we had no idea he could
from
speak
when
this
he
language.
was a couple years old. It was still in there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe he was taken from his people fully when he was 6 years old. Yeah.
Oh, so, okay.
And so we were all staying back by the
Wow.
fence. He went and sat with her. They had this long conversation. Next, she invites me and my husband up, and because we're getting married that week, and she has us sit, and then she invites my friends with the wedding to come. She picks out plants. She puts everybody to work, and then she started giving us marriage advice with my father translating. And the best advice she gave us, her name was Faustina. The best advice she gave us was, you always sleep with a machete under the bed. You don't know what he's going to do. Oh my gosh. I was just rolling. So it was, but I'm just like, Dad, how, nobody besides Bree people could talk to this woman except for my dad out of nowhere. And we were just kind of like, okay, buddy, there's some things that you haven't told us about, but he just didn't know himself. But when my oldest child was born, very unique eyes, and we couldn't figure it out. And then my dad goes, I think those might be the eyes like my mom. They used to call her China all the time. And then I started looking at pictures of people going into northern Panama and just roadside stands, what people's eyes look like there, because it's not a big touristy area. And sure enough, matched up my kids' eyes. And then just started looking at maps and
what are they like? I'm
so
so curious to picture what is.
Okay. My kid straight up has jaguar eyes. So we're called jaguar people from the Chichen line of languages from Colombia going up to southern Mexico. But they do look a little Asiatic, but they are cat eyes. My kiddo has cat eyes. And with folks that I luckily have some relationships with in the tribes now, they're their eyes. So
beautiful.
Yeah. So, so all that comes together, these projects of hope, if you will, as we're reconnecting. So Costa Rica, a lot of tourism there, but still a lot of reverence for the Bree. And the country has been so good about educating their people. It's a very educated, high literacy rate in the country, and that includes for tribal people. So there's some great people that are fantastic at talking about chocolate and going to Switzerland and going to Europe that are still tribal. Panama, less of an emphasis on tourism and that level of education. So I've been dipping down into northern Panama now, and they have comarcas there, which are like reservations. Those started there in 97. We started our reservations here basically with that westward expansion. And so a much different sort of scenario. And so, yeah, I'm working with a small group at one of these geisha coffee farms that hires Ngabe Bugle people. And they make goods that they generally trade in the reservation, still a barter and trade system, but they're trying to work towards transactional. So it'll probably be very small scale, but it's like, let's get you some sergers, let's get you some cloth. They still like make some fibers out of palm and everything. But I also did a little bit of work in Mexico where I saw something like that also transition with Yucatan Mayan. And it's like when people want to and they start learning English, there is a market for people that want to do ecotourism. So like I know one project in Mexico that I just absolutely love, Yucatan Mayans that I've done herbalism work with. They started learning English. They got their own tract of land that nobody wanted, and it's a bird sanctuary now. So you get birders coming from all over the world, and they didn't have to do anything really disruptive with the environment there. They do the cacao thing for them, but it's like, I will show you where the birds are. And if you can just like honestly show a foreigner where a quetzal is, people eat that up, and it actually does provide.
What's a quetzal? Is that a type of bird?
Bird, yeah, it's that green bird with that long tail, and it goes whoop. It makes that kind of sound.
Yeah, I'd like to see one of those.
Guatemala.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it's one of those things. Like I know, like I've done work in Costa Rica in attractive forest, and I had this pair of quetzales by me all the time, and I was just like, "Yo, why are you always around?" And for some people, it's like, I am so excited to see that bird. But when you're actually in some of these tracts of land and they can be undisturbed and life ways and environmental ways can be undisturbed, guess what? The birds are there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we have this idea of nature that nature can be very scary and very quiet. And nature is very loud and vibrant. The thing is, when our manky human selves get into a scene and we crash through and we're hitting plants, and I mean, animals are going to go wild. It's very disruptive. But if you can afford to be still in nature, nature is vibrant. And I always laugh at how many animals come around me and everything. Like I say I have very good megafauna luck, to which all these basically these lists that people have, like their checklists.
You sent me a video of a sloth. That was just a month ago. I've never seen that. I don't know if that's unusual or not, but yeah, I was impressed.
I was walking with my kids, and I had a kid that had a bucket list that wanted to see one of these sloths. And so we went for a walk down the beach, and I'm like, let's just go ahead and stand in this lagoon here. And it was this little patch of trees. I'm like, let's stand here. And sure enough, the sloth basically pulled itself right towards us. And that was the camera angle. And that was just on my phone. So I have really good animal luck, but you gotta be interdependent with them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Maybe it's luck, but it also seems like a beautiful interdependence practice. And whether or not someone has the excitement of being a place where they might see a three-toed sloth, kind of wherever any of us are, going out and spending time in nature, like you said, in that way that's quiet and humble is a really great way to get a taste of interdependence. Yeah. I have a friend who, among her many skills, is bird language, and I've done a couple of sessions with her where she invites us to know that the birds are noticing us and talking about us. When you go into a space, and it really shifted something for me of from another endless place where unconsciously I had an extractive mindset of what can I listen to, or where I erase myself out of a belonging to nature and just think it's there for me to observe. But the difference when I realized oh no, everything is listening to me also, is such a palpable potent experience of direct experience of interdependence.
Yeah, and when you have that moment, especially where you are all of a sudden, if you're sitting, you touch the ground and you have reverence for all the mycelium that you don't even see. It's all around if you can take that moment of stillness. And I love that moment of stillness when people don't think about it that often. So I live not too far from the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, and it is like a weapons arsenal. They made napalm, sarin gas, and mustard gas there in World War II and coming out of World War II. And it's still stored there. But in the 70s and 80s, they decided to make it into a wildlife refuge. So now there's a massive bison herd, and it's a wildlife and recreation place. So I was just there on Sunday, and there's a 12-mile loop that you drive with a bison herd. And you actually see like a landfill where all these like nerve gases are and everything still, but they're covered in grass now. But I was with my spouse, and I'm like watching this bison herd like nearby. And I'm like, are you okay with just sitting and parking here for a minute? Because they're going to cross the road in about 20 minutes. And I'm like, if you can just sit and park, like it's going to be pretty amazing. They're going to go around our vehicle. And cars are just coming. They stop. They take a couple of pictures. You're not allowed to get out of your car in this area. And then they take off. So we're just watching all these cars just pass by. And there was a period there where there were no cars, but us just sitting there. And all the new calves were just playing. And they were playing and chasing each other back and forth the road, like in front of us. And finally, like this whole herd, like eventually, like, 50, 60 of them, like passed all around the vehicle. And we're safe. They're safe. But it was that thing of like, if you can just be chill. And so my spouse, like they have themes for the way that they're doing the reporting in his job this week. The theme he made for everybody was still. And he was just like, so glad that I made him just pause. And just like we're watching the coyotes interact with the herd and just hang out with them. And there are all these like phenomena and all this awe that he had never realized before, just because he took that moment.
Yeah, let's talk more about that, because like being able to pause and be still is a skill, and it's a skill that a lot of people don't have these days. And it's one of the other skills that you teach. And so I'd like to talk about that a bit, like your work in supporting nervous system coherence and just like that, the capacity to pause, and how that relates again to interdependence and why that's important.
Yeah. I became a certified yoga instructor in 2009. I had had a car accident previously, and I had to relearn how to walk, and my gait was still off. So when we moved to Colorado, I joined an ashram to get yoga teaching certification, but really to be sort of like in an immersed program so I could really try to work on my posture and just the way I held my body. So that's why I did that. But I already had teaching experience, and I never planned to be a yoga teacher. And yeah, it just kind of came about that, wow, some people actually need something like this. And I actually back away and hesitate from saying yoga too much because it has its own origins. And I am convinced that every culture had a union of mind and body, just that some cultures weren't allowed to keep that. And yoga was through India because they had a Maharaji class that was able to hold it, as they basically gave the colonizers every other class. And that's the only reason it probably survived. So I think about that. And when I do go back to Panama, where I worked with 5 tribes folks, I do always ask about, so what are our medicines about mind, body, union, stillness, and how we connect to the world? So that's something that I definitely explore. And I've been doing regulation toolboxes. And I kind of do that a lot. Like when I did the non-GMO labeling campaign in 2014, I had actually worked in 7 hours of no contact on my contract for Sundays, where I was up at my ashram and I was doing a specific mantra course. Because as a spokesperson, the opposition is just throwing a lot of stuff at you that isn't substantiated in the blue book. And it's like, how do you sit on stage and basically take lies thrown at you as well as ad hominem arguments, maintain your composure so that you can just focus on those 3 talking points instead of blowing up and just really making yourself look like somebody should trust, I guess. So I really focused on that with the campaign, and I couldn't believe how handy that came. And like, I'm not like, if you ever saw any videos of me doing that, I'm not there kind of muttering under my breath, like, in a Harry Potter movie. It's just a total stillness in my mind, but I'm reciting mantra. And that's how I dealt with that stressful situation. So I've used versions of that, over time, like natural childbirth, blah, blah, blah. The stress after George Floyd was murdered, that kind of stuff. And so this last year, I've really been tapping back into some of the simple parts of self-regulation, just because this election and the way that I guess the election interference that people were dealing with online, it was so ambient that I was just feeling it everywhere. Like I could tell when somebody's on TikTok and just doom scrolling, or where they're passively taking their information, and people around were just a dysregulated mess. So really for my own self-preservation, because I needed people to focus driving their cars when I'm driving a car, I started offering a lot of things called self-regulation toolboxes. You get what I'm saying though, right? Like this is how we're connected. And if you're a mess out there, I don't want to drive around you. And that's where a lot of us are in our cities. So probably I'd say,
and driving is the least of it.
Oh,
like then there's like actually when you're actually talking to people who are dysregulated, which is a lot of people.
But driving, you're in killing machines. And
right,
it's just so easy to forget that as we're taking out pedestrians and causing ridiculous accidents that have severe consequences that can last a lifetime if you don't die right there. So I really try to get people to monotask and focus on one thing, especially behind the wheel. But in July, just with the dysregulation and the election interference and just seeing how people were really getting dizzied up, and it was a coordinated attack on this, I thought, how do I do this? Well, do you go online where people are, your algorithm's not going to see it anyway and be like, hey, everybody, breathe. Like that doesn't, like, we're like meerkats. We love signals of distress. Like, oh no, the worst is coming. That was a survival mechanism for us. And we're too good at paying attention to negative messages like that. And it's the having that dinner with each other, the very highest social determinants of connectivity that bring us back to not have to listen to all that noise of those negative messages. So I started doing these things called regulation toolboxes, and I would do them wherever. For people that look like me, like I know we have a Servicios de la Raza here in Colorado. I did it at one of their youth summits. I did it for the Active Collective Trauma Summit that was like mostly Black people that were gun violence survivors. I started doing them for like corporations, like basically, and it's just very basic stuff about how we breathe, how we manage to turn our attention, just everything that you can possibly do so that, not that I'm saying, hey, guess what? The world is awesome. You're going to be great. Light a candle, because the world is not awesome. And a candle lighting is not going to make everything perfect. But the more regulated you are in your nervous system, the more prepared you're going to be to make those snap decisions you need to make that can come so fast. As if you were in a car accident, and did you remember to get all that information? Did you remember to do this or that? Or if there's some other danger that does come around you, because we have essentially called a wolf on our nervous systems right now with all these dangers in our mind and these messages we're getting from outside, that when something truly does happen, are we ready? And this includes things like where I am in Colorado after the Marshall Fire a couple of years ago. That is a consequence of climate change. All of a sudden, like all the newscasters and the people from NOAA, they felt so horrible that they could not give basically an alert to evacuate early enough, because they were going by the science that they were used to. And it isn't just the Chinook winds coming off from the west. We have the straw effect that blows down. So the winds, like we're dealing with Dust Bowl event winds right now, and that caught everything off guard for that day. But I've talked to people from NOAA. We've talked to a lot of our researchers. So now our red flag warnings come a lot faster. The variables have changed. And when they come, they also tell people, have your go bag ready. And that just happened in the last 2 years. Okay. So this is a real climate response we have to do in this area. Now, if we're scared all the time and we're hearing it from 6 a.m. when we wake up and we have our phone in bed and we're just hearing it everywhere and people are just so negative. And if we get an alert at 1 p.m. saying, have your go bag, it's time to go, red flag warning. Like, are you going to pay attention to that when you've been freaked out all day? But if you can be in your nervous system when an actual danger or something that you need to respond to happens, you can be a lot more discerning so that you make the best decisions for your outcome.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, that's why I started doing these basic toolboxes.
And you came and did it for our non-GMO project staff team, and it was awesome. Or we got like some version of that. And yeah, people loved it, because I think, so you're pointing to an increasingly real, but also like relatively extreme scenario. But then there's also just like, I think a lot of people don't realize that when we're in fight or flight and dysregulated, our prefrontal cortex isn't working very well. So I that's why, at the Non-GMO Project, the way that we work and what we're committed to is consciousness and being regulated. And that's unfortunately not the norm yet in the business world. Like a lot of people, even when it's not like life or death stakes, like get your go bag, like we're all making important decisions all day, every day. And a lot of people, I think, still don't really understand the basics about the nervous system and how that affects the brain and how that affects our communication. So I'm so glad that you're offering that, and just feel like it's something that we need more and more of in this world.
And it feels good. That's the thing. It just feels good afterwards.
I'm just curious for any final thoughts you have around this question of your sense of what life is asking for us in these times and how we step into the responsibility for that. Things like just anything that's top of mind for you with what you're seeing in the world, with what we've covered in this conversation. What do you think is most helpful for each of us to commit to and think about to contribute to the well-being of life? I know it's really big.
That is a huge question. Yeah, I don't think life is asking in a nice way right now. Like we're done past nice, right? This is a thing. Nature will be fine. Nature will survive. We saw that in the pandemic when people stayed at home and all of a sudden birds got louder and everything happened without humans in the landscape. We see that in the nation of Puerto Rico that has sustained some massive hurricanes, but in areas that did used to have food production, the forest has overtaken. The forest overtakes places. Like nature will go on, just will it go on with humans in landscapes? And we're seeing that with rising sea levels and everything. So yeah, I think it would do people to pause, be still, listen, dive into that humility with your landscape and realize you're not the overseer of everything. You truly are connected. And with that, don't think you have to do everything at once. And that's where people really fall into traps. But if you do have institutional power that generally comes with a lot of money, think, do I have enough? And that's something we're facing right now with the degradation of our country. We have somebody with $400 billion. $400 billion is enough. I think this person just is really set on getting $1 trillion and screws humanity in the process. So don't be like that person. But if you have enough, consider divesting where your investment portfolio is. If you have enough resources and you truly have enough, consider rematriation to people that have been left out of the process and never had the chance for land ownership. I did an Ignite Denver talk years ago, well, probably around 2015 or 2014, where I did talk to people about, the whole vote with your dollar thing. It's easier to vote with your dollar when you have multiple homes, right? If you don't even have home ownership, it's a little bit harder to vote with your dollar. But voting with your dollar can be something as simple as food. And yeah, going to an organic farmer's market, that could be super baller if you don't have the money for it. But if you can afford one thing or afford to buy something from somebody your local community, or even somebody aligned with your values, like that has sticking power. So, just with your plate, make it joyful, make it a great meal, but have a meal with people that really aligns with your values. Right now, we're looking at synthetic biology with like $1 billion of research and development. That isn't always coming to pass, but nobody's talking about the complete amino acid chain for proteins with legumes and grains. You can have a cheat meal of rice and beans and veggies with your loved ones, and that's going to count. And I also will never deride anybody on their food choices. Like if it's pizza and if it's Doritos and all those things, if you're sitting with loved ones and you're having that meal, that is the healthiest thing you can do for the planet. So I know when people hear me say some of the stuff, they're like, oh boy, I'll never eat around you. I'll never do X, Y, Z. I'm like, are you eating with your family? Are you eating with loved ones? Are you eating in kindness? That is the biggest act you can do.
Beautiful. Kia, I love what you just said about how the most nourishing thing we can do is share a meal with people we love in kindness. And that sense of connection, both through food and through presence, is so central to everything you do. I'm wondering if, before we close, I'd love for you to share about your community space in Boulder and what inspired it and the role it's playing in fostering that kind of interdependence.
So my space right here, it's called Bodie Bridge. It's actually in Westminster. It's like right between Boulder and Denver, and it is a movement and herbalism space. It's also becoming a third space for a number of orgs. It's interesting, all the beefs that are happening in Denver and Boulder, this kind of becomes a neutral spot. But I say movement, it's yoga, it's meditation, it's a gathering space, it's a teaching space, and it's a landing space for what people need. And that has definitely been changing greatly since the start of the year. And I'm grateful to have it and give people an alternative from some of the nonprofit spaces that they've been going to, especially as that nonprofit funding has been slipping away.
Yeah, and I also know that you have a lot of skill and resource in helping people regulate. And you've talked in this conversation about how in times of crisis and overwhelm, that ability to be present and regulate ourselves is what allows us to meet the moment wisely. And that resonates so much right now with, like you said, everything that's happening. And I'm wondering if, to complete this conversation, if you'd be willing to guide us through a short breathing practice, something that we can return to as a way to ground ourselves and stay connected and do that self-regulating that's so important right now.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many things I pull from the toolbox, the self-regulation toolbox that I offer to people. A really big one that's so simple is when you wake up, our shared rituals in the society is usually just to reach for your cell phone. And when you wake up, how about you get a new ritual of touching the ground or touching the bed or touching something that's grounded near you, and think of 3 pieces of gratitude from the day before or that you're excited for that week. Because even though things might seem very chaotic, if you're breathing, my hope is that you have things that you can be grateful for. So wake up, touch something, think of 3 bits of gratitude. That's going to help you a lot with going forward. But as far as breathing, a big one is just really to have that good posture, your sit bones sitting wherever they need to be. Sitting is the weakest position for us, but a strong body and breathing very deeply through your belly. When we're stuck in our minds, we tend to just breathe in our chest and upper part of our torso. And that's when we find ourselves almost panting. So as you inhale, the belly is going to get very full and extend. The rib cage goes out and up, collarbone rises. And then exhale, that collarbone falls, rib cage goes back to the midline, and the belly gets smaller. And I really want people, just when they can, pause, take that full breath through your belly. And I'm saying this because all of us right now, our breathing's getting really affected. And I don't know if you've heard it in the world, there's a lot of sighing. And when we have that sighing, that's usually a hallmark of the kind of grief that we're feeling. And it's just where we're taking air in. So have that gratitude, have that full breath where you can. And there are definitely things to grieve. I'm not saying don't get away from that, but this is going to help bring you back to that center where you can still be active. And instead of just staying in grief, you can be activated in the things you're going forward for the kind of world that you want.
Beautiful. Kia, thank you so much for all of the wisdom and inspiration and resourcing that you offered today in this conversation. Really grateful for you.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Thank you for joining us on Future Kind. Remember, every choice we make ripples through the web of life. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep making future kind choices that nourish yourself and our world. Future Kind is brought to you by the Non-GMO Project and the Food Integrity Collective. New episodes emerge with every new and full moon. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and share your Future Kind moments with us on social media using #FutureKind. Music by Yaima, Masaru Higasa, and Pepper Proud. Rise Ceremonia 6.